Prologue: The Creators. This story is about a creator, one of the beings responsible for life itself. A being who can appear as a goddess, a god, or something beyond gender, depending on who they stand before. They are one of four entities who existed before time was even a concept. Four beings who traveled the endless beyond, coming together to begin a single project: the creation of life. They traversed the multiverse in search of habitable worlds, places where life could take root and grow. And on each of those worlds, they ensured there would be a guiding force, something born of that planet, capable of leading the others and continuing the will of the creators. But the four did not agree on what that guidance should look like. Some believed in distance. They wanted to observe, to watch the choices their creations would make, to study their evolution, to see what they would become without interference. Others saw their creations as children. They believed in nurturing, in guiding, in protecting them from suffering. And some believed that their creations should one day rise, evolve, and stand beside them as equals, that they should be shaped, trained, and refined until they could join the cycle of creation itself. This story is about one of those creators, the one who saw their creations as children, and who chose to intervene. They left the realm of the creators and descended into a world still in its earliest stages, a world where human-like beings struggled to survive, where progress had barely begun, where suffering was a constant reality. They did not come with a grand design. They came to help, to guide, to teach, and above all, they came to watch their children grow. Welcome to the portal library. Step through and let the magic begin. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd love more stories or have a request. New videos uploaded every Friday. The Rise and Fall of an Empire, a dark fantasy story. Chapter 1: A Creator's Touch. In the galaxy designated X-97, there existed a single habitable world called Aurelian, a planet where many life forms had taken root. On its surface lived two dominant races, humans and insectoids, both intelligent and capable of communication, learning, and growth. Beneath them, deep within the planet, lived another race, the Shades, a hybrid species sharing traits of both surface dwellers, yet shaped by the darkness below. Despite their differences, all three races possessed the ability to understand one another, to learn from one another, and to coexist. It was into this world that the creator, who referred to themselves as Sterling, descended. Sterling first appeared in a small village in the northern region of Aurelian, a quiet place, untouched by larger conflicts, where survival was still a daily struggle. Sterling stepped into the village at midday. It was small, a cluster of huts arranged around a central fire pit, surrounded by a low wall of stacked stone. The villagers noticed Sterling immediately. Two of them stepped forward, an older man and a woman not much younger. Their clothes were worn, their hands rough. They looked Sterling over with open concern. "Come inside," the woman said. "It's too cold to be standing out here." Sterling followed without argument. They gave Sterling a seat near the fire and a bowl of something warm. It was thin, more water than substance, but it was offered without hesitation. Sterling accepted it. They ate slowly and watched the village settle back into its rhythm. The people here worked constantly, patching walls, sorting through dried roots and preserved meat. Children stayed close to the adults. No one wandered far. Sterling decided to stay there for now. Within a few days, the villagers stopped treating Sterling like a guest. Sterling began to make herself useful. She helped with repairs, helped with the hunting, helped sort what was good from what was not. And when she saw things that could be done better, she showed them how. The villagers learned quickly. They watched closely and asked good questions. Sterling found that she liked teaching them. It was a young boy named Stefan who first asked about magic. He was 5 years old and small for his age, with sharp eyes that tracked everything. He had been watching Sterling for 3 days before he finally said anything. "How did you do that?" he asked. He was pointing at the small flame Sterling had coaxed from her palm to start the morning fire. "I asked the world for it," Sterling said. Stefan thought about that for a moment. "Can I ask too?" Sterling looked at him. "Yes," she said, "but you have to learn how to listen first." It turned out Stefan already knew how to listen. He learned faster than Sterling had expected. He needed only a general sense of direction before his instinct took over. Fire came first, then wind, then light. Lydia, another child in the village, was different. She came to Sterling's lessons every day and watched everything, but she did not reach for magic the way Stefan did. She was fascinated by the way Sterling explained stuff. Sterling spent more time with her than with anyone else in the village. Lydia wanted to know everything, not just what worked, but why it worked, and whether there was a better way to explain it to someone who had never seen it before. She asked Sterling to describe things twice so she could find 2 different ways to write them. Sterling recognized something in her, the same restlessness, the same instinct that something important should be recorded before it was forgotten. Months passed, then years. What had been a camp of struggling families became a settlement with walls and stores and a well. Stefan grew and became the person the village turned to when something needed doing. Lydia became the person they turned to when something needed to be understood. She developed tools for recording and ways to teach the younger children to read. Sterling helped them scout the surrounding territory. They found other human settlements, some struggling worse than this one had been, and brought them into contact with each other. Resources moved between them. People traveled back and forth. The settlements grew. Sterling taught magic to anyone who wanted to learn. Simple incantations, nothing complex. Just enough to speak to the matter of the world and ask it for aid. It spread from village to village until, for example, entire communities no longer depended on wood stores to survive the winter. By the time Stefan and Lydia came of age, the territory had grown into something that could be called a province. A few hundred people, connected, organized, and able to look after one another. Sterling stood at the edge of the settlement on the evening of their coming-of-age ceremony and watched the fire in the square below. Stefan was laughing at something, surrounded by people who trusted him. Lydia was sitting with a young girl, showing her something written on a flat piece of bark. Sterling felt proud of all they have accomplished. That evening, she told them she was going to leave. Stefan nodded once, and then asked if there was anything else he needed to know before she left. Lydia did not take the news as easily. "I want to come with you," she said. Sterling looked at her. "I know. You could use someone who documents things." "I could," Sterling said, "but they need you here more than I do." Lydia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll follow when I'm done." Sterling believed her without a doubt. She left the next morning before the settlement had fully woken. The fire in the square was still burning from the night before. She did not look back for long. There were other creations on this world. She had spent years among the humans, and she had not yet met the insectoids, or the shades who lived beneath the surface. She wanted to take care of all of the children. Chapter 2: The Making of a King, Stefan's Perspective. Stefan was 16 when Sterling left. He stood at the edge of the settlement and watched until he could no longer see her. Then he turned around and walked back to the square. There was work to do. The adults in the village had always pushed Stefan toward practical things. Before Sterling arrived, his days were spent with the hunters. He learned to track, to read weather, to move quietly through open ground. It was useful work, and he was good at it. But Sterling had shown him something larger. After his coming-of-age ceremony, people started coming to Stefan with problems. Disputes over resources, questions about magic, newcomers who had heard about the province and arrived with nothing. Stefan handled each one. He organized the distribution of supplies, settled arguments, and made sure every person who arrived was shown where to sleep and what was expected of them. He did not wait to be asked. He stepped into the role because it was there and no one else was filling it. Lydia watched all of this from a distance. One evening she sat across from him while he was going over a map of the surrounding territory. "You're moving fast," she said. "We have a lot of ground to cover," Stefan replied. "I mean with the people," Lydia said. "You're making decisions that used to take the elders a week." Stefan looked up. The elders spent a week talking and the problem was still there at the end of it. Lydia did not argue. She just held his gaze for a moment, then looked back down at the tools she was working on. Stefan turned back to his map. He began organizing the province in earnest. He formed groups: farmers, artisans, hunters, magic practitioners. Each group had a purpose and a structure. He funded Lydia's research into magical tools. He sent scouts in every direction to map what lay beyond the territory they already knew. He also founded a mage guild. A small group at first, people like him who had taken well to magic and wanted to push further. Stefan trained alongside them personally. His belief was simple. If the province was going to survive, it needed people who could protect it, and those people needed to be the best. Stefan believed this was what Sterling had prepared him for. He was her student. He carried what she had taught him, and it was his responsibility to make sure that gift reached as many people as possible. He started sending representatives to neighboring settlements. Not to conquer, not yet, to demonstrate. He invited their leaders to visit, to see what the province had become, to see people using magic freely, to see children who were fed and warm and learning. Most of the time, that was enough. Some settlements sent people back with the representatives. Others asked to join outright. Stefan welcomed all of them. He also made sure Sterling's name was known. He told the story to everyone who arrived. Who she was, what she had given them, why it mattered. He commissioned carvings. He had scribes record the accounts. He wanted every person in the province to understand what they owed and where it had come from. There were those who refused. Villages that turned the representatives away. Settlements that had their own leaders and their own beliefs and no interest in joining anything. Stefan went himself in those cases. He made his case in person. He was patient at first. He showed them respect. But there came a point where patience started to feel like a luxury he could not afford. He had begun to think in terms of what the province would need in 5 years, in 10 years. He had begun to think about threats that had not arrived yet. He needed more people, more land, more resources, more mages. He could not wait for every settlement to come around in its own time. Lydia did not always agree with his decision. "You cannot force people to accept something good," she said. "I'm not forcing anyone," Stefan replied. "I'm giving them the opportunity to be part of something better." "And if they don't want it?" she asked. Stefan was quiet for a moment. "Then they'll come to understand eventually." Lydia looked at him a long time before she spoke again. "That's not what Sterling taught us." Stefan did not respond. He respected Lydia. He cared about her opinion. But he also believed she was thinking too small. She saw individual people. Stefan saw a civilization. Those were different problems that required different approaches. He returned to his maps that night and began planning in earnest. The province would expand. It would have to. Interlude 1: The Insectoid Race. Sterling moved south. The landscape changed gradually. The cold gave way to warmth, and then to heavy, damp heat. Trees grew taller and closer together. The ground was soft underfoot. Sterling shifted their form as they traveled. The pale silver hair and dark skin of the young woman they had appeared as in the north would draw unnecessary attention here. They settled into something different. An older male form, broad-shouldered and unhurried, modeled after one of the first elders who had welcomed them into the human camp years ago. It felt appropriate. They were not in a hurry. The forest was full of life, creatures that had no speech but moved with clear purpose, creatures that built and hunted and rested in patterns Sterling found genuinely interesting to watch. Sterling stopped often. They observed without interfering. Eventually, Sterling found the insectoids. The civilization was built into a mountainside. Cavern entrances opened onto carved ledges, connected by paths that wound up through dense greenery. The construction was deliberate and old. Sterling stood at the edge of the forest and looked up at it for a long time. Then they took one step forward and stopped. A group of insectoids on an upper ledge had gone still. They were watching him intently. Sterling raised one hand slowly, palm open, and then sat down at the base of a tree and waited. No one came down. Sterling came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time they brought something, fruit from the forest, hunted meat, cleaned and set down at a visible distance before Sterling retreated to sit and wait. It took weeks before anything changed. One morning, Sterling arrived to find the food from the previous day had been taken. They left more and sat further back than usual. A young insectoid appeared on a low ledge and watched Sterling from above. Sterling did not move toward them. They simply acknowledged the presence with a nod and stayed where they were. This continued for months. Gradually, the distance shrank. Small groups began appearing at the forest edge in the mornings. They observed Sterling with what Sterling recognized as careful, methodical assessment. They sent different individuals each time, Sterling noticed. They were gathering perspectives. Sterling did not demonstrate any magic during this period. They simply showed up, brought food, and waited to be invited further. The invitation came eventually. A single insectoid approached on foot and gestured for Sterling to follow. They led him to the outermost edge of the community, a cleared area just below the first row of cavern entrances, and pointed to the ground. Sterling sat. From that point, different insectoids came daily to speak with them. Their language took time, but Sterling had time. They listened more than they spoke at first, picking up patterns, learning sounds and gestures, building understanding piece by piece. When Sterling finally demonstrated fire, starting from a palm with a quiet word, the group watching scattered immediately. Sterling closed their hand and waited. They came back an hour later. After that, the process moved more slowly and more carefully. Sterling explained what magic was in terms the insectoids could examine and test for themselves. They did not accept anything at face value. They argued, questioned, and debated among themselves before returning with more questions. When they were finally ready to learn, they designated representatives. 4 individuals chosen by the community to receive the knowledge on everyone's behalf. Sterling did not push for more. They taught the 4 what they could and trusted the rest to move at its own pace. Chapter 2 continues, Stephan's perspective. Back in the province, Stephan stood before a gathering of scouts who returned from the Eastern Territories and listened to their reports. There were 3 settlements beyond the river. One was open to contact. One had not responded. One had turned the scouts away with weapons. Stephan studied the map. "We go to the open one first," he said. "Take resources, take instructors, show them what we have to offer." "And the third settlement?" one of the scouts asked. Stephan traced the river line with one finger. "We'll return to them. Give it time." He said it calmly. He believed it when he said it. But he also marked the third settlement on the map, in a different color from the others. I hope you are enjoying this story so far. What magic power would you like to have? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 3, The Beginning, Lydia's Perspective. Lydia had not slept well in months. She sat at her desk before dawn, the same as every morning, surrounded by records she had compiled over the past year. Reports from the outer provinces, accounts from travelers, notes from her own observations. She had organized them carefully, the way she organized everything, and the picture they formed was not one she could ignore. Stefan had built something remarkable. Nobody could dispute that. What had once been a struggling camp in the northern cold was now an empire spanning multiple provinces, with roads connecting settlements that had never known each other existed. People were fed. Children were learning. Magic was no longer a rare gift but a common tool. Lydia had helped build it. She knew her contribution. The documentation systems, the artifacts, the tools that let communities store and share knowledge across distance. She had poured years into that work, and she was proud of it. But over the last year, something had shifted. Stefan had always been ambitious. That was not new. What was new was the edge that ambition had developed. Settlements that declined to join the empire were no longer simply revisited and persuaded. They were pressured. People who questioned the Sterling Order publicly found themselves without allies very quickly. The Mage Guild, which Stefan had founded to protect the empire, had started being used for other purposes. Lydia had raised these concerns with Stefan directly, more than once. He would listen like usual, then explain, calmly and thoroughly, why she was thinking about it wrong. She had stopped bringing it up, not because she agreed, but because she could see it was no longer useful. What was useful was the task in front of her now. Stefan had given her 3 months. The insectoids living at the southern border of the continent had resisted every diplomatic approach the Empire had sent. Stefan's patience was running out, and Lydia knew what that meant. She had volunteered to go herself before he could reach a decision she could not undo. Stefan agreed with conditions. 3 months. If she could not bring back an agreement, he would handle it his own way. Lydia packed what she needed and left the next morning. The journey south was long. The Empire's territory had expanded so far that it took weeks just to reach the border. Lydia traveled with a small escort, crossing terrain that changed from open plains to dense forest to coastline. At the southern edge of the continent, she boarded an insectoid transport vessel arranged through careful advanced communication. It was the most sophisticated magical device she had ever seen, and she spent most of the crossing studying it with poorly concealed fascination. She reminded herself this was not the time. The insectoid settlement on the far side was built differently from anything Lydia had encountered before. Structures carved into elevated rock, surrounded by layered forest, with pathways that moved between levels using mechanisms she did not fully understand. It was old, older than anything the Empire had built. The insectoids at the border were not hostile. They were cautious and deliberate and showed no particular interest in moving quickly. Lydia was hosted at the outer boundary for weeks while requests moved through their internal channels. She used the time to learn as much as she could about their language and customs, filling pages of notes every evening. When the request to meet with the inner circle finally came, it arrived with conditions. A representative approached Lydia's quarters early one morning carrying 2 small devices. Through careful exchange, Lydia understood what they were. Restrictive artifacts, designed to limit magical output and block connection to outside magical communication. She would wear them for the duration of her time in the inner circle. Lydia looked at the devices for a moment, then held out her wrists. The inner circle met in a chamber deep inside the rock. 7 insectoids, older than any she had encountered at the border, were present. They watched her enter with the same careful attention she had observed throughout her stay, but no hostility. Lydia made her case. She spoke about the Empire, about Stefan, about what cooperation could mean for both peoples. She chose her words carefully, kept her tone even, and answered every question without hesitation. Then they spoke among themselves as Lydia listened. Her grasp of their language was incomplete, but she had been studying it for weeks and she caught enough. They were discussing a figure who had come to them long ago. An older male who had spent months earning their trust before ever demonstrating any magic, who had taught their designated representatives with patience, who had never pushed for more than they were willing to give. Lydia kept her expression still. She asked carefully about this figure. The inner circle exchanged looks. One of the elders answered. They did not know the name of the entity. Only the inner circle had ever had direct contact, and that contact had been long ago. But the methodology, the patience, the specific approach to magic as something offered rather than imposed, it was unmistakable. Sterling had been here. Lydia felt the weight of that settle over her. She took a breath and continued the conversation. By the end of her time with the inner circle, the tone had changed. They were not prepared to enter a formal agreement with the Empire, and Lydia did not press them on it. But they were willing to continue talking. That was more than anyone else had managed. She left the inner circle with hope in mind, and made her way back toward the border transport. She had used just over 2 months. She was still within Stefan's deadline. What she did not know until she reached the border was that the insectoids there were in distress. Their long-distance communication magic, the same network that had helped coordinate her visit, had gone silent. The scouts they had sent toward the continental border had not returned. Lydia asked questions. The answers she received made her stomach drop. She boarded the transport and pushed it as fast as it would go. Interlude 2, Creating Legacy, Stefan Perspective. Stefan sat on his throne and listened to the reports from his chancellors. The border insectoid group had been resistant for the full first month of Lydia's absence. Their communication magic had made them difficult to approach and impossible to surprise through conventional means. Stefan had found that irritating. He had agreed to Lydia's mission because she had asked, and because he had calculated it was worth 1 month to see if diplomacy could save him the effort. After the first month passed with no agreement in sight, he made his decision. He did not announce it as a conquest. He framed it to the Mage Guild as a necessary intervention. The insectoids at the border had access to transportation and communication magic that the Empire needed. They had been given ample opportunity to cooperate. They had declined. The Mage Guild moved fast, as Stefan had instructed. He did not want a prolonged engagement. He wanted it resolved. It took just over 2 days. The insectoid camps at the border were overwhelmed before they could coordinate a response. The Mage Guild had prepared specialized enclosures, using subterranean materials that disrupted magical output and cut communication. Those who complied were contained. Those who resisted were not given a second opportunity. Stefan reviewed the reports each morning with his coffee. He asked precise questions about the enclosures, the condition of the artifacts recovered, the status of the Mage Guild's losses. He did not ask about the insectoid casualties. At night he dreamed about Sterling. The dreams were not pleasant. Sterling stood at a distance and said nothing, but the expression on their face was clear enough. Stefan woke from each one with the same feeling and spent an hour working through it before he could continue with his day. He was doing this for the Empire. He was doing this so that no one within its borders would ever have to suffer for lack of resources, lack of protection, lack of knowledge. He was doing this so that Sterling's name would be known across the entire world, so that what she had given them would never be forgotten or diminished. He could not see what there was to disapprove of. Still, the dreams continued. Stefan established the Sterling Order that season, a formal religious organization structured and funded by the Empire with a permanent seat in the capital. Its purpose was to preserve Sterling's teachings, maintain her temples, and ensure that wherever the Empire expanded, Sterling's presence expanded with it. He wanted Sterling to have somewhere to return to. He wanted her to see what they had built. He commissioned the Order's first temple himself and approved the design personally. Then he turned to the maps on his table and studied the water crossing to the insectoid's home continent. The transportation artifacts recovered from the border camps were being studied by the Mage Guild. They were making progress on replication. Stefan estimated it would not be long before the Empire had its own fleet. He gave the order to begin preparations. In the name of Sterling, for the glory of the Empire. Chapter 4. The Beginning of the End, Sterling's Perspective. Sterling left the subterranean levels with a full heart. The insect humanoids had been unlike anything Sterling had encountered on the surface. They moved through the deep tunnels in bonded pairs, communicating through pheromones in a language Sterling had spent months learning to read. They gathered together only occasionally, once every few years, drawn by something deeper than habit. They valued solitude the way others valued community, and yet when Sterling crossed their path, each one received him with quiet generosity. Food, rest, worn stones pressed into his palms as departing gifts. Sterling had spent years down there, moving slowly through the dark, meeting each individual he came across. He taught where teaching was welcomed. The insect humanoids already carried magic in their bodies, an inherited connection to the planet's core that expressed itself as a guardian instinct. They did not need instruction so much as they needed someone to sit with them and recognize what they already were. Sterling did that willingly. As he made his way back up and began traveling north toward the surface, he noticed something in the air, a disturbance, subtle but persistent. The magical composition of the world felt uneven in places, like pressure building behind a wall. Sterling had felt something similar before, when sealing his own power before descending. He could not place the source. He kept moving. Crossing back to the main continent, Sterling assumed the form she had worn among the humans. The southern continent surprised her. Humans were here, further south than she would have expected. She saw patrols moving through areas she had known as insectoid territory. Sterling paused and considered this. Then she decided it was a good sign. The races were working together. They had found each other and were sharing the land. She approached one of the human patrols with her hands open. The soldiers stopped, then they dropped to their knees. Sterling looked at them for a moment. She told them quietly that they could stand. She asked how they were. She asked what they were doing this far south. They did not answer her questions. They looked at her with an expression Sterling did not have a word for. They insisted on bringing her back with them. Their king wanted to meet her. They had prepared something in her honor. Sterling thought that her children had simply missed her. She agreed to go. They brought her to a teleportation anchor. Sterling had never seen one before. As a creator, she could move through the world without such devices, but she was genuinely pleased that they had found a way to build one themselves. It spoke to everything she had hoped for when she first sat down in that small, cold camp and started teaching two curious children magic. She stepped through. The capital was enormous. Sterling walked through it beside her escort and tried to take everything in without letting her expression change. The roads were wide and well-maintained. The academy's buildings were impressive. Farming tools built with magic sat in market stalls alongside transportation devices and communication artifacts. Everything she saw represented decades of accumulated work. She was proud. She let herself feel it fully. Then she saw the statue. It stood at the head of a grand hall, taller than the room needed it to be. People knelt in front of it, not paused in passing. Knelt, heads lowered, hands pressed together. The statue was her. Sterling stopped walking. Her escort moved around her politely. She stood there a moment longer than she intended, then continued on. Stefan arrived shortly after. He looked exactly as she remembered him, older in years but carrying himself the same way he always had, with that forward-leaning energy, like he was already thinking about the next thing before the current thing was finished. He smiled when he saw her, and the smile was genuine. Sterling felt a surge of emotions. She hugged him. They talked for a long time. Sterling asked about everything: the academies, the guild, the transportation network. Stefan answered with enthusiasm that reminded her of the boy who had asked about fire from her palm. She asked about Lydia. Stefan said Lydia was buried in research, always working, always building something new. Sterling smiled at that. It sounded exactly right. Stefan offered her a tour. Sterling accepted. As they walked, she asked about the statues. Stefan brightened. He told her about the Sterling Order, the temples, the worshippers, the decades of devotion that had accumulated in her absence. He told her as though it was a gift he had saved to present to her. Sterling listened until he finished. Then she told him clearly that this was not what she wanted. Stefan's expression shifted, just slightly, but Sterling caught it. She told him she was not a goddess to be knelt to. She told him she wanted her children to be capable and self-sufficient, to care for each other, not to pour their devotion toward a statue. She told him that worship was not the same as growth. Stefan was quiet for a moment. Then he began explaining, calmly at first, then with increasing urgency. The people had a purpose. They had direction. The order gave them something to strive toward. Sterling just needed to understand the scale of what they had built, the scope of what they were becoming. She had been gone a long time. Things were different now. Sterling watched his face as he talked. Stefan suggested they continue the conversation somewhere private. The Sterling Order Temple, a meeting room, just the two of them with tea, away from the crowds. Sterling agreed. She wanted to speak plainly with him, and a private room was better for that. The room Stefan brought her to was deep inside the Order building, lavish, underground, and notably free of statues. Sterling appreciated that briefly. They sat. Stefan had tea prepared and spoke about the magical properties they had managed to infuse into it. Sterling sipped it and let him talk, gathering herself for what needed to be said. Then she said it. She confronted him about the insectoids. She confronted him about the order. She told him that magic was not a tool for control. It was not a weapon for conquest. It was something she had offered so that her children could live better, not so that they could force others to kneel. Stefan stiffened. He tried to explain. The insectoids had been resistant. They had been given opportunities. Sometimes guidance had to be firm. Sterling just didn't see the full picture. Then he said something he had not meant to say. Something about even the insectoids coming to understand her magnificence, even if they had to be taught harshly. Sterling set down her cup. She asked him directly what that meant. Stefan saw her face and stopped talking. The silence lasted only a moment. Sterling began asking questions, and with each one, Stefan's expression shifted further. Sterling could see it happening. She could see the calculation behind his eyes. She had watched him think since he was 5 years old, and she recognized it now. He suggested they keep talking. He used a gentle tone. He said they needed more time to work through this together. Sterling agreed. She still believed she could reach him. She moved to stand up. The magic left her body like water through a cracked vessel. Sterling went still. She had felt this once before when she sealed her own power before descending into the world. But this was different. This was not a seal she had placed on herself. The walls around her were lit with something, faint lines running through the stone, and she understood within seconds what they were doing. She looked at Stefan. He was already standing. He looked at her with something she could not name. He told her she just needed time to think, that she would understand eventually, that this was all for her. Then he walked out and locked the door. Interlude 3, Dynasty, Stefan's perspective. Stefan won consistently. New territories, new resources, new academies. The Mage Guild had become something that would have been unrecognizable to the people who first built it. The Empire was bountiful, teleport across continents, harness reserves of condensed magic from deep within the earth. They were reaching toward things Sterling had once described in passing: other worlds, the wider universe, the full scope of what creation contained. Stefan believed this was what he had been shaped for. He believed it completely. But the dreams did not stop. Every few nights, Sterling looked at him across a dark space and said nothing. The expression on her face was always the same. Stefan woke from each one and spent time working through it before he could continue his day. He told himself the dreams were a symptom of how much he cared, how much it mattered to him that Sterling would eventually understand. His researchers had discovered something that confirmed everything: areas where Sterling had lived for extended periods showed concentrated spikes in the world's magical composition. Sterling was not simply a teacher. She was a source, a living reservoir that replenished the world's magic simply by existing within it. Stefan had read that report multiple times. It clarified things. It confirmed that Sterling was exactly what he had always believed her to be. Everything he had built in her name was not excessive. It was proportionate. The whole empire, every conquest, every forced conversion, every insectoid held in an enclosure, all of it was proportionate to what she actually was. Stefan was not naive. He had never been naive. The dreams unsettled him not because he believed them, but because he could not make them stop, and anything he could not control was a problem. If Sterling returned and disagreed with what the empire had become, she needed somewhere to be that was not in front of the wrong people. He built the room in the deepest level of the order building. He had the walls lined with siphoning material. He told the researchers it was a containment study. They did not ask further. When Sterling arrived, Stefan showed her everything he had built. He watched her face and felt genuine pride and genuine fear in the same breath. She was exactly as he remembered. She asked about Lydia immediately, and Stefan felt something twist when he answered. He had not spoken to Lydia in months. When Sterling's expression changed after his words about the insectoids, Stefan recognized what was coming. He had imagined this conversation many times. He had prepared arguments. He had patience. What he had not prepared for was how much she would sound like Lydia. The decision happened faster than he had planned. He did not feel good about it. He told himself that was proof he was still the person Sterling had taught, that he still had a conscience, that once Sterling saw reason, he would open the door himself and they would move forward together. He walked out of the order building into the evening air and stood still for a moment. Then he gave the order to mobilize toward the next continent. Lydia heard the news from someone running past her in the street. The goddess had returned. The goddess was with the king. Lydia was already moving before the sentence was finished. She ran through the capital trying every contact she had, asking anyone who would stop long enough to answer. People were feverish with excitement. They pointed her toward the Order Temple. She cut through side streets, moving as fast as she could. She reached the temple as Stefan's delegation was leaving. She saw Stefan walking out of the order building. She called his name. He turned and looked at her. Lydia had known Stefan her entire life. She had watched him change over decades, had tracked the slow, widening distance between who he was and who he had been. She thought she had already accounted for all of it. The look on his face stopped her mid-step. He did not speak to her. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they have already decided not to deal with today. Then he turned and teleported away with his entourage. Lydia stood in the street. She started making contact with everyone she trusted quickly before any order could come down that would prevent it. She gathered what information she could. Only one piece came back clearly. Stefan had walked into the order building with Sterling. Only Stefan had walked out. She spent the following weeks trying to find a way inside. She worked with the insectoids who had been conscripted into the Mage Guild, people who had no devotion to the Empire and every reason to help. They were the finest artifact builders she had ever encountered. Together, They mapped the building's magical signature and traced a concentration of siphoning activity deep underground. Sterling was still in the capital. Sterling was still in that building. Before Lydia could move on what they had found, the royal guards came for her. She demanded an audience with Stefan. She was not given one. Stefan came to see her once, weeks later. He stood in the doorway of her cell and talked for a long time about what the Empire was going to become. Immortality, other worlds, the full inheritance of everything Sterling had pointed them toward. His eyes were bright and his hands would not stay still. He looked like a man who had not slept in a very long time. Lydia said his name twice. He did not pause. She sat and listened until he left. She did not speak after he was gone. She sat with her hands in her lap and stared at the wall. Sterling lost track of time. The room drained her constantly. Every time she gathered enough strength to think clearly, the walls pulled it back out. She drifted in and out of consciousness and could not always tell which was which. When she was awake, she wept. She did not try to stop herself. Stefan visited. Each time he looked younger. Sterling understood where her power was going. She understood it completely, and the understanding did not help. He brought news of the conquests. He talked about the subterranean race with the same tone he had once used to describe new hunting territory. Sterling closed her eyes. She had visited them. She had traveled through the dark for years, getting to know them one by one. She had sat with them in their quiet and learned their language and pressed her hand flat against the stone floor when they showed her how to feel the pulse of the planet's core. And she had left them. She had left them the same way she had left the humans, trusting that what she had given them was enough, trusting that her absence would be temporary. The other creators visited her in the in-between spaces, not physically. Projections, presences, voices she recognized from before time had a name. They told her what she already knew, that this was why they kept their distance. That intervention of this kind always reached the same destination eventually, that the fault was not hers alone, but that the pattern was clear. Sterling argued. She said it was her failure and hers to fix. They were patient with her. They did not agree. Years passed, then even more years went by. The disturbance she had first noticed in the air underground grew worse. She could feel it even through the siphoning, even in her weakened state. The world was not built to hold a creator's sealed power for this long. The magical composition was destabilizing. Stefan's researchers were pulling condensed magic from deep in the earth, and the planet's core was registering the loss. Sterling thought about the subterranean people. She thought about what they existed to do. They had spent their entire civilization tending to the core, purifying it, strengthening it, doing the work that kept the world intact. Stefan had been pulling that world apart from the inside for decades. Sterling stopped arguing with herself on the day she understood that the world could not hold much longer. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about the camp in the north, the fire pit, 2 children asking questions about everything. She thought about the insectoids and their careful assessment of every stranger. She thought about the subterranean pairs moving through the deep dark, devoted to something they would never see directly. She thought about Lydia, who had wanted to follow her and stayed behind because there was still work to do. Sterling pressed her hands flat against the floor. Then she unsealed her power. The light reached every part of the world at the same moment. 1 second, the Empire's capital was loud with mourning activity. The next, the light came. Then there was nothing more to know. Epilogue: the sentencing, creator's perspective. The world came apart slowly at first, then all at once. Sterling sat in the northern field where the village had been. The huts were gone. The stone wall was gone. The fire pit was gone. Everything her children had built from that first small camp outward to the edges of the continent was dissolving into light and dust, and the fundamental particles that had composed it. Sterling's form was changing too. The human shapes she had worn for decades were falling away. The silver hair, the dark skin, the elder's face she had borrowed for the South, all of it returning to what she actually was beneath it. Magical composition, pure matter, unstructured, the raw form of a creator between assignments. She sat in the dissolving field and did not move. An unknown amount of time passed. Sterling had no way to measure it and did not try. Then the other three arrived. Sterling felt them before she saw them. None of them spoke immediately. Sterling looked at the space where the village had been. There was nothing left to look at. She looked anyway. The first creator spoke. The sanction was formal, delivered without anger. Sterling had violated the foundational agreement between them. Creators were not permitted to use their power independently, without council approval. The checking balance existed because they were not simply powerful. They were the scale on which entire worlds were weighed. What one creator did alone could not be undone by three together. Sterling had not simply intervened in a creation. Sterling had destroyed one. A world, every living being on it, every race, every individual, the insectoids on their mountainsides, the subterranean pears in the deep dark, tending to a core that was already gone, the humans in their academies and their temples and their cold northern camps, all of it. The sanction was 5 millennia. No use of creator's power, no contact with any world or any creation within it. Supervised presence with at least one other creator at all times for the first additional millennium. Sterling did not refute it. They did not argue, did not negotiate, did not ask for the terms to be reconsidered. They listened to the full sanction, and when it was finished, they were quiet. One of the other creators waited, then asked if Sterling understood what had been decided. Sterling said yes. They remained in the dissolving field after the others withdrew slightly. Sterling looked at the particles still drifting where the northern settlement had stood. They had watched Stefan learn fire from a palm. They had watched Lydia press a piece of bark flat and try to find a second way to write the same word. They had left, trusting that what they gave was enough, and come back to find it had become something they did not recognize. Sterling thought about the agreement they had broken, not just the council rule, the deeper one, the one they had made with themselves before ever descending, to help, to guide, to teach. They had stayed through Stefan and Lydia's entire childhood, and then left before the thing they built had stabilized. They had trusted 2 children with tools that could be misused, and assumed the love behind the giving act would protect against misuse. They had come back after decades and been surprised by what they found, as though surprise was something a creator had any right to. Perhaps the other creators had been right. Perhaps the distance they preferred was not indifference. Perhaps it was the only honest acknowledgement of what a creator actually was when placed next to a mortal life. Too large, too permanent, too capable of becoming exactly what Stefan had turned Sterling into in that temple. Something to be captured and used. Sterling settled into the supervised quiet of the sanction and began to think. The end. Quote of the week: "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. Thank you for listening to the rise and fall of an empire. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you want to hear more, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. New stories are uploaded every Friday.